It's your Wednesday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Glad to have you guys back for another day. Big show coming up today. Lots and lots to talk about. Not an exaggeration when I use all of those lots. Got to get to the Wolves. Talked about them a lot on Tuesday's show, but things did not get any better. 116-107 loss to the Suns. On the surface, doesn't sound so bad, but the way they did it, the starters, again, performing poorly, all of them in the minus side of the plus-minus, while the reserves, by and large, played pretty well. Got to get into that and talk about where things stand as they keep going forward. The Bucks are next, so got to figure some things out relatively soon here as the competition gets better. Got to get to the Wild. They won 4-1. Everything seems well with that team again. Some continuity, showing how that is a positive thing and how they've kind of turned their season around quickly. Good goaltending always helps, and that continued to be the case with Marc-Andre Fleury having a strong game in that 4-1 win over Montreal. Some bad Gopher basketball injury news. Sounds like Jamison Battle is going to miss the opener. We'll not know when exactly he'll be back. Sounds like a minor injury, but even a minor injury to Jamison Battle is cause for concern with that team. Randy Johnson, Gopher football beat writer, will join me here in a little bit to talk about that team, to talk about the win over Rutgers, what to look for in Saturday's game against Nebraska, and a sneak peek ahead to next year's Big Ten schedule, which gets quite a bit harder than it was this year. First, though, what did I miss? Got to talk about the big Vikings trade deadline acquisition of TJ Hockenson. I'm sure Ben Gessling and Andrew Kramer and I will talk about it some more later on today on Access Vikings. That podcast should be posted later this afternoon or this evening. But just right off the top of the bat, a few things I had to have thought about, say about that. One, it does signal to a certain degree Vikings going for it this season. I don't think it's like a push all the chips in kind of move. You didn't trade 2 first-round picks or something. Hockenson's not that kind of player, but trading a couple of decent picks, a second and a third-round pick, getting a couple of fourths back plus Hockenson, so you're giving up a decent amount of draft equity in these next drafts coming up. Does show that you're not afraid to go for it in a certain degree. Hockenson's definitely an upgrade at tight end. We'll get a little bit into what he brings to the table here in a minute, but just from an overall philosophy standpoint, this does seem like, new GM Kwesi Adofo-Mensah meeting the moment to a certain degree, understanding that this team is 6-1, probably playing above expectations, maybe even playing above what their record could be or should be had they not won all these close games, but they are 6-1 in this moment. The rest of the division is 3-5 or worse. The rest of the conference seems relatively wide open at this point as well. And, this being his first trade deadline, showing that, hey, if you put yourself in a position to be, to be this good, to be in a position to win, we will add players to the mix. And a part of that is out of necessity, right? That's the second point here. Irv Smith Jr. goes on injured reserve on Tuesday with that high ankle sprain. Should be out several weeks now, obviously, with that designation and with that injury. I'd be very curious to know if they would have made this move even if Smith was healthy, because Smith was not having a great season. And, part of the problem with Smith over the years is that he has been unable to stay on the field. So this was just another example of him getting unfortunately injured. But even before this, 22 catches for 168 yards this season for Irv Smith Jr. Hockenson, by contrast, 26 catches, 395 yards. So maybe we can get into a little bit of what he brings now, because I watched a couple clips of kind of his bigger plays this season. One was a really long catch and run against Seattle where he kind of took a pass, pretty intermediate route, went to the sideline, got through some arm tackles and just took it down the sideline all the way to inside the 10-yard line. So that's the kind of breakaway potential he has. Same with the Dolphins. Dolphins blitzed. Hockenson looked like he was in man coverage, beat man coverage on a not a deep pass, but a pretty a longer throw, and then caught it, kept going, went 58 yards on that play. So he's got some of that big play tight end catchability that I think that they will benefit from. But I also think that he will help Kirk Cousins in a lot of different ways. Will help him with some of the short targets, help him with some of the rollout game. They haven't really got their rollout game going much this season. That was a big thing they did well last season. A big thing that they've done well with Kirk Cousins over the years is, roll him out, get him to one side, and maybe they haven't had to do it as much this season because the offensive line play has been better to a large degree, but that was a good weapon for them, and I think this year, when they've done it, a lot of times it's been with Johnny Munt, and no offense to Johnny Munt, who's still healthy, who's still playing, but those plays are not going to go for a lot of yards when it's Johnny Munt. He just doesn't have the breakaway speed, doesn't have the elusiveness, so those plays are going to go for maybe 3 or 4 yards, not 7 or 8 yards, not 10 yards, not those chunk plays that you get unexpectedly when you have a playmaker like TJ Hockenson in that spot. So they bring that to the table as well. So adds a dimension to the offense now that they just didn't have. And we've talked, for the last few weeks about, do they need to add one more piece to the passing game? And, again, because Smith is injured, this is more, kind of a one-for-one move, but it's an upgrade in that regard anyway. Especially over the way Smith had been playing this season. Takes a little bit of the pressure off of Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, KJ Osborne, Dalvin Cook. Their other skilled playmakers. Gives them another playmaker in that offense that Kirk Cousins can look to and have that go-to guy, that guy that they can trust to make a big play for him. So that is huge, just that confidence that he will give them to make a big play. Now, he's obviously, a highly regarded player. He was the number 8 overall pick in the 2019 draft. Funny enough, same draft that Irv Smith Jr. was picked in. Hockenson, because he was a first-round pick, had that 5th-year option. It was picked up, so it sounds like he is under contract for next year as well. Doesn't count much on this year's cap, which is nice, but will make about $9 million, a little bit more next year, which could certainly spell the end of the Irv Smith Jr. era, because he is a free agent after this season, and you would not keep 2 guys who have that same skill set for a lot of money after this year. I would not imagine. So this could be the end of the Irv Smith era, but it could be the start of TJ Hockenson in Minnesota, at least for this and next year, and maybe even more if he proves to be a very good fit. So, bottom line with this move is, I think a lot of fans were excited. I think they thought it was a good trade. I think it was too. Pass catching tight ends like Hockenson don't come around all that often. Someone who can affect a game like that from the tight end spot. I think he was 4th among tight ends in catches in 2020. He had 61 again last year before he got hurt towards the end of the year. And again, already with almost 400 receiving yards in just 7 games this season for Detroit, which, let's face it, does not have the same sort of dynamic offense that the Vikings have. So maybe he will thrive even more here in Minnesota. He's an Iowa native, went to Iowa, starred there. Again, number 8 overall pick, so the pedigree. He was highly regarded coming out of college. I think overall people are excited about this, and I think for good reason. I think he's a guy that helps your team quite a bit. He's a guy that, maybe you didn't expect them to be able to go get because he is so good and because he's from a division foe, but that seems to be less of an issue than it used to be because the Vikings did trade with the Lions and Packers during the draft, if you will recall. So I think overall you just look at this and say, hey, didn't have to give up a ton. You give up some draft capital, but you didn't have to go wild. You didn't have to do anything drastic to your cap, and you got yourself better. I'd say that is a pretty good trade, a pretty good way to look at it by the Vikings, and doesn't guarantee them anything down the stretch, but it does give them one more option, and a very good one at that.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake. With 24/7 gaming, the good times never have to end. And you can satisfy your cravings at our restaurants and bars. Or relax in one of our luxurious hotel rooms. Those that play together, stay together. And don't forget to join Club M so you can spark new memories and bask in the rewards along the way. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
Let's talk Gopher football now with Randy Johnson, covers that team for the Star Tribune. Randy, they got back on track last week, maybe not surprisingly, 31-0 over Rutgers and basically all their wins this year have been pretty lopsided and against teams that have definitely struggled against other decent opponents. They've yet to still, maybe have that signature win. Maybe we thought Michigan State was that win, but I don't think that is at this point. Nonetheless, they've got to feel good about getting, whatever track they were on at the beginning of the year, feeling like they're closer to that now after last week's win.
Yeah, it was pretty much a required situation for them. They needed to stop that bleeding, end that losing streak at 3 and not let it get to 4. And they did so against Rutgers. It was a pretty vanilla game plan, but it was effective. They started off with a 19-play, 99-yard drive that took 10-27. Next possession they have, it was 13 plays, 86 yards, and it took about 7 minutes. So it was, it was just, they bludgeoned them from the start and wore them down and basically got that 14-0 lead and, just kind of played clock control for most of the game, and then popped a couple touchdowns after a couple Tyler Newman interceptions in the fourth quarter.
And that's generally where PJ Fleck's teams are at their best, right? When they can do the ball control, when they can establish the ground game, things like that. The push-pull to that obviously has always been, can they throw it when they need to? And they obviously didn't need to against Rutgers, but I still think there are times when people want to see that even in games where they don't need to do it. And there was some of that questioning this week, even after the win. How do you think PJ Fleck looks at that when it comes to, throwing against teams where you don't necessarily have to throw the ball to win?
Yeah, I think it was a situation where he didn't want to do any harm. You have Tanner Morgan coming off the concussion. I guess he didn't want to expose him to a ton of hits, and he didn't want to turn the ball over. He explains that they've gotten into trouble in games when they've went deep, and usually those were in games where they ended up losing. They're probably playing from behind. They're definitely playing from behind in those. So you get into a forced situation. Yeah, this would have been a time possibly to, okay, let's see what they had opening up. But he just really didn't want to feed Rutgers anything that could get them back in the game.
I think Fleck after the game said he's not afraid to say he's a better coach when Mo is on the field. And that's just true. I mean, what else can we say about him? Another 100-yard game, another, kind of part of that legacy and, record-setting legacy. I don't know. You probably have a better base of Gopher football history than me. Where do you put him among some of their all-time great running backs?
He's got to be way up there. He has an outside chance to break Darrell Thompson's career record for rushing yards. Basically if they might take a bowl game to get there. He could do it in 4 if he averaged 170 or 180 right in there. I've done the complete numbers on the 4, but with 5, it'd be down to an average of 130. Yeah, that could happen. He's up there. Up there with Darrell Thompson. I'd say Lawrence Maroney and Marion Barber III are up there. Mo's not the explosive breakaway speed guy like Maroney was, but just so effective in moving the chains. Just wears people down, and great vision. He does a great job of at times making himself small, so he gets in the tight places and hides behind linemen in a way.
And didn't he joke when he came back? He's not getting any faster. He's just got to kind of do his thing. What was, I can't remember what he said at the beginning of the year, but one of those guys like Tanner Morgan and some of those other guys that came back for another try, trying to do something special this year.
Yeah, and it hasn't worked out the way they've wanted it with the Big Ten West race. They're behind in that. It would take a big collapse by both Illinois and Purdue for them to get ahead of those, because both of those have the tiebreakers on them if it came down to head-to-head. But they can still salvage a decent season here if they can run the table. It's not going to be necessarily easy to run the table. It's Wisconsin at the end. They're playing a lot better. Nebraska, since the coaching chain, has been playing pretty well, and find out a lot more about them this week.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a good transition point to this Saturday's game, Gophers at Nebraska. I believe that's an 11 a.m. kickoff. Nebraska still, though, 3-5. They have been a little bit more competitive, but they still lost 26-9 to Illinois. Illinois has been pretty good against a lot of teams this year, so don't take too much from that. But, if you're just kind of looking at this game and thinking, well, Gophers have a better record, Nebraska's been down, what scares you about Nebraska if you're the Gophers?
I would just say their athleticism. They have some players. DJ was joking that you look across the field and they all look the part. They look like they're pro players almost. They have the transfer wideout from LSU who's doing a good job for them. Their quarterback situation is a little bit murky right now with Casey Thompson having a hand injury suffered last week. So the Gophers might be looking at a different quarterback there. They have to figure out what type of style they'll be playing against. Nebraska's got talent there. It's a matter of them putting it together.
Yeah, so that was kind of the whole Scott Frost era before he got fired, right? I mean, they were close, maybe not close to being, a title contender, but close to being at least competitive in a lot of those games, and those close games were what were doing them in. So a team like that, I suppose, can be dangerous, even especially now after the coaching change. And you were telling me before we started recording, last time the Gophers went down in Nebraska was kind of that lost season of 2020, the COVID year where they only played, I think, 7 games total, and they were just ravaged by COVID when they went down there, but did still manage to come away with a win. What did some of the guys you talked to Tuesday remember about that time?
Just how cold it was that day. It was a very, very cold December day. The other thing that a lot of them talked about was how at the end, Mo Ibrahim had a long run, takes a knee out before the goal line, so he doesn't go in, doesn't get Nebraska the ball back. They end up winning by 7, but probably would have been a little bit more if he would have decided to go in for the touchdown. But strategy wise, it made perfect sense.
Okay, sure, that makes sense. And just thinking about that, how that was only 2 years ago, is a good reminder of just how much disruption there was just across college football. I know it happened to everybody, but we kind of think about these things in black and white, and I still sometimes wonder what might have been with this program, even though they had a good year last year and they've had a decent year this year and still have a chance to be something this year. What might have happened from a program building standpoint had they not gotten that momentum from 2019 just stopped stone cold in 2020?
Yeah, you really wonder. That's a very good question, because that, coming off that a top 10 finish in the AP poll, a nice bowl win over an SEC opponent, that they had all the momentum in the world there, and that did stunted a bit. They came back decent last year, but stubbed their toe a couple times that cost them a chance at the Big Ten West title. And this year, especially the Purdue game with full of the errors they made in that one, that one's going to haunt them the rest of the season.
Looking back is one thing. Looking forward is another. Let's finish with this idea, Randy. I mean, one of the reasons this year hurt so much is you looked at the schedule and it was pretty favorable, not just the teams they were going to play in the Big Ten West, but some of the crossover games. It seemed like, Penn State was going to be a tough one, but just across the board, it looked like there were a lot of winnable games. Next year, you get Ohio State and Michigan back on the schedule, that Big Ten schedule released just a few days ago. What do you make of what they have up against them next year?
It's a challenging schedule, and then that includes the non-conference too. They go to North Carolina, which that's their Tar Heels are decent program. One of their home games is Louisiana Lafayette, and that's been a team that's pulled some upsets over the years. Their coach Billy Napier now at Florida, so they've produced some players and produced some coaches. So then you get into they open with Nebraska on a Thursday night and to start the season. So we'll know a little bit about them right away.
Yeah. Finishing thought here, Randy. What we talked a little bit about what might scare someone against Nebraska. Will the Gophers have to do more than they did against Rutgers in this game? And if so, are they ready to let Tanner Morgan loose a little bit more if they need to do that?
Yeah, I think they're going to have to. I don't think they're just going to be able to rely on Muhammad Ibrahim all by himself in that offensive line. They do need to have a passing threat in there. There were times they could have passed against Rutgers and chose not to. I would think that they'll have some opportunities. The key to them is getting the lead and playing from ahead. when they do that, they're a pretty good team. They're not built to come back from multiple scores down. So getting the lead, that'll set up the ability to pass a little bit better. I would think, and I think Nebraska would be. Rutgers had a really good run defense, but Gophers took advantage of it. Nebraska probably, not quite as good against the run, but they're poised to score a lot more than Rutgers did. So it's one that I wouldn't expect a shutout this week.
No, but if it's one that if you're going to have any kind of thought of a reclaimed season, you got to have this one. So we'll see if they can get it on Saturday. Randy, good stuff. We'll check in again next week. All right.
Sounds good, Mike. Thanks a lot.
Good stuff from Randy Johnson. As always, one postscript to our conversation. I was not shocked, but very surprised when I looked at the point spread, the odds for this game. Gophers 16-point favorites going into Nebraska in this game. I defy you to ever find a game where that was the case. But that is the case this year. Nebraska, really struggling. They already, like we said, like we talked about, fired Scott Frost. But I believe that's a bigger point spread even than the Gophers had at home against Rutgers last weekend. And, again, that was coming off a 3-game losing streak. Gophers now back on track to a certain degree after that 31-0 win. But just shows you how bad Nebraska is this season, how far they've fallen. Opportunity the Gophers have to get to 6-3, to get bowl eligible, to feel like, okay, at least we have something that we're building momentum towards at the end of this year. Now, a loss on the flip side, and I'm sure they don't want to think this way. People within the program don't think this way, but a loss would be pretty devastating because, again, the opportunity ahead of them is against a team that has struggled by and large this season and does not have much left to play for this year. So we'll see if they can get it done on Saturday. And I don't know exactly what version of the Gophers we'll see. I don't know, what version of Tanner Morgan we'll see. But the versions that they've shown up against poor teams this year, Nebraska certainly qualifies as a poor team this year. Those versions of the Gophers have been more than up to the task against these less than stellar opponents. Let's talk Gophers really quick, too, before we get to Wolves and Wild at the end of the show. Jamison Battle, Gophers basketball, very good forward, really a bright spot on last year's team. A lot riding on him this season as they brought in some other good players. He is going to miss the opener with a foot injury. Doesn't sound like it's terribly serious, but a foot injury, you never want to mess around with that. He had minor surgery, Ben Johnson said Tuesday, so it sounds like it's low level, week to week. He's not going to be back for week 1, but I would imagine this doesn't linger too far deep into his season. But we'll see when he's back. Anytime he's off the court, that's a bummer for the Gophers. So hopefully he can come back soon. Good guy. He was on the show a couple times with us last year. Really well spoken, really interesting, good basketball insights. So speedy recovery, and we'll see him on the court relatively soon. Speaking of on the court, let's talk about the Timberwolves, even though I don't want to. When I say I don't want to, I realize this is my show. I can do what I want. I don't want to talk about the same things over and over again, but the same problems are plaguing this team that I talked about just yesterday. Went pretty deep on D'Angelo Russell and some options the Timberwolves might have if he doesn't get things straightened out in the coming weeks. He had a terrible game on Tuesday night against Phoenix. Just 2 of 8 from the field, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, a minus 20, 5 points in just 23 minutes, which is also telling and also interesting. Chris Finch had obviously seen enough of some of his starters in this game because the minutes were not distributed quite as equally or abundantly as they had been. Jaden McDaniels was a minus 18 in just 17 minutes, scored just 4 points. So McDaniels with 17 minutes, Russell with 23 minutes. Those guys got fairly quick hooks. Jordan McLaughlin back, played pretty well. He was a +6 in 9 minutes. Jalen Noel a +14. Naz Reid a +10. Torian Prince a +6. All these guys off the bench running the offense like Chris Finch wants it to be run and really getting the Wolves back into this game at various points. It was a mostly lineup of reserves plus Anthony Edwards that helped the Wolves get back to within 87-85 with about 9 minutes left in the fourth quarter before the starters came back in. turned the ball over a whole bunch of times. Everything fell apart, and there you have it. I think the most damning quote in all of this was from head coach Chris Finch. He was asked after the game what improvements he's seen from the starting group. Reading from Chris Hines' game story here, he says, well, there really hasn't been a whole lot of growth with that unit just yet. Ouch. He's not wrong. The starting unit, like I pointed out the other day, has been a net minus for the season, and that certainly carried over yesterday because all of the players for the Wolves who were in the starting lineup were minus players. Like I said, McDaniels a minus 18, Russell a minus 20, Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns a minus 12, Rudy Gobert a minus 14. By the way, Rudy Gobert only attempted one field goal in 32 minutes. He did try 7 free throws, made them all, had 9 rebounds, had a block, but not the impact you would want him to have in that game. Towns and Edwards with 24 points apiece. They were okay. Not the most of their problems. Towns finished with 10 rebounds, 7 assists too, so he was pretty good in this game. But they got to figure this out. They're obviously not clicking anywhere near where they want to be clicking, and so now it's that push pull, right? It's that push pull between you're going to need these players to play well if you're going to have not just a good season, but a great season, right? You've got these expectations now from the Rudy Gobert trade, from everything that you've pushed the chips in to a certain degree with all these draft picks you've given up. These guys need to figure it out, and it's only 8 games into the season. So, like I said yesterday, we're not in panic mode yet. We're not in the mode where they should be throwing everything overboard. But you can't keep giving games away or being less competitive with a less competitive lineup, even if it's on paper your best lineup, because those games are going to count down the stretch. And these are the things we talked about before the season started. How fast could they learn? How fast could they catch up with these guys that clearly were going to need some extra time to get up to speed with each other? Towns and Gobert barely played with each other in the preseason, things like that. It's one thing to play in practice, get up to speed that way. It's much different to play at game speed. So how long can they continue to go with a lineup that is not being productive in hopes that they will start to click and be productive down the stretch? They can't keep giving away games. I'm not saying they would have beaten Phoenix anyway. Phoenix, a very good team in Phoenix. But that's a game you like to be a little bit more competitive in, not just throw a scare in them, early in the fourth quarter before the starters come back in and then order is restored. And it's kind of funny. I watched up until that point, shut it off because I had to go to bed. I was like, I know how this game is going to end. Phoenix is going to go on a run right now, right after I turn this off, and that's going to be the end of it. And that's how it ended up being. So, again, not the sky is not falling, but it's not pretty right now. The sky is full of clouds. How about that? They're not a fun watch right now, at least not when the 5 starters are out there. And they need to figure this out relatively soon. I put 20 games on it the other day. I think 20 games is still a good benchmark. You can probably muddy your way through to 10-10 by that point, and then reassess what's working, what isn't working, and then maybe at that point you need to make some major lineup adjustments. And D'Angelo Russell's the obvious one to me, like I said, because you've got nothing invested in him beyond this season. These other guys, you've got a lot invested in them in the future, and he's frankly the one that's playing the worst out of the starting 5 consistently so far this season. So we will see what happens with all of that, but right now it's not pretty. And I don't know how they're going to make it more pretty. And it doesn't seem like Chris Finch has a whole lot of ideas right now either. Let's finish with the cooler, the Wild, standing in stark contrast to the Wolves. Yeah, they're 5-4-1, which is really 5-5 if you count the losses. Wolves are 4-4. Their 5-4-1 feels a lot different than the Wolves 4-4 does right now because the Wild is on the upswing after that 0-3 start. 5-1-1 since then, a 4-1 win over Montreal on Tuesday night. Watched some of that game. A lot going on last night, including World Series. Phillies took a 2-1 series lead over the Astros. 5 home runs in that game, so I was kind of flipping back and forth with that. But, the Wild, Kirill Kaprizov continues to do Kirill Kaprizov things. 2 more goals in this game. Just having another tremendous season. They got Marco Rossi, his first assist, first point of his NHL career in this game. Maybe that'll get him going a little bit more. Eriksson Ek had a good game. Fleury, 35 shots, 34 saves. Again, he's been great since that really terrible start to the year. So a lot of things getting smoothed out for the Wild, even though they're missing some of their regulars. A lot of their depth players coming through in this game. And, got to say, Matt Boldy has been very impressive to me, too, this season. Had a goal and an assist in this game. I think one of the storylines going into the year was how Boldy would fare without Kevin Fiala in the lineup. Seems like things are going just fine. 6 goals, 4 assists, 10 points in those 10 games. So he is off to a very good start, ranking up among the leaders in goals in the NHL. He's got to take a backseat to Kirill Kaprizov. Like I said, 8 goals now for Kaprizov, tied for 3rd in the NHL. But, just in general, this feels like a much different vibe for the Wild now, which is a good thing for them. And they're a fun watch right now. They were not a fun watch at the beginning of the year. They kept falling behind. I know they were playing some dramatic games, but just the holes in their game earlier this season and being able to patch those up this quickly, get to the right side of 500 this quickly, has got to be pretty gratifying for Dean Evason. So kudos to them. Good win for them again. We'll see if they can keep it going, and maybe the Wolves can take a lesson from the Wild. That'll do it for me today. Good stuff coming up the rest of this week as well. Enjoy the rest of your unseasonably warm Wednesday. Hope you listen to this somewhere outside. If you didn't, it's going to get colder. You know it is, so please enjoy the day as best you can. Talk to you again tomorrow.